Today's social media segment is brought to you by Terrebonne General Health System. Your health is our legacy. Rouse's, you're either local or you're not. Buick, the craft of modern luxury. St. Martin and Bork, know your rights.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. If you don't know me, my name is Christine Russell. I'm the Lafourche Parish District Attorney. And every other year, we try to put on a seminar like we are tonight, just to teach new board members and those of you who have been around a while about public bid law, about open meetings, and about public records. And then you get to ask questions of the experts that are here tonight as well. HTV is videoing it, and it will be on social media on their page. Also, at 12 o'clock on Friday at lunchtime, they will also run it as well. So if you know someone who could not be here tonight, but they want to watch it, please encourage them to do so. We're going to get started so you guys can get home. I want to start by first thanking Attorney General Liz Murrow and her Assistant Attorney Generals who are here, Les Theriault and Mr. Brett Robinson, who are joining us and traveled from Baton Rouge to be here tonight. I really thank both of you for being here tonight. We're going to start a little different than the agenda. Mr. Robinson's going to start with public bid first. So we're going to start with public bid. You can follow along, and please ask him any questions that you may have. Can they interrupt, if that's okay?
Sure. I can't promise I'll answer all the questions.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, so we're going to start out with public bid law. My name is Brett Robinson. I'm an Assistant Attorney General with the AG's office. I serve as the Public Finance and Contracts Section Chief, and so I deal a lot with public bid law, other contracts as well. A lot of those big contracts that the state does with bridges and things like that, that all kind of filters through public finance at the AG's office. So. But this is only going to focus on the public bid law, which really deals with public works and materials and supplies. Okay, so for all state entities, public entities throughout the state, I should say, they have to follow the public works public bid law. Okay, doesn't matter whether it's a state agency or local political subdivision, town, water district, whatever it may be, they have to follow the public bid law for public works projects. For materials and supplies, that is something that the locals like you have to, the state agencies do not. And so I'm going to mainly focus on public works, okay, because that's a big deal. And I'm also going to touch on materials and supplies. Typically, my presentations last an hour, so I'm condensing it tremendously. All right, so I'm going to hit a lot of the high points. I'm not going to really go into the gist of why we have the public bid law, other than just know this, that we are all tax-paying citizens, and so the taxpayer money is being spent, okay, it's being spent, excuse me, whenever these projects and materials and supplies are procured. And so we want to make sure that there's no favoritism or exorbitant or extortionate prices. We want to make sure that the public gets the best deal, right? Okay, so just understand this, though. State agencies for the DOTD, they have their own special laws when it comes to the public bid law. So, and the reason why I have that disclaimer is because you want to be confident in the bridges that you're traveling over. You don't want to think that it's the lowest bidder got the job, right? You want the best quality. And so it's a little bit different for DOTD, but for general public bid law, for all other political subdivisions, this applies. And so it's public works, materials and supplies. So when it comes to public entities, you know, there's various different ways that people or entities are created. If you're created by the state or the parish or a municipality, city or town, then you're a public entity, okay? And that's why you got to follow this. The public bid law, though, follows who's building the project. And so there are occasions where somebody else, a third party, a nonprofit maybe, is building a building for a public entity that results, right? Okay, that's the end result. That's a separate scenario. I'm not going to go into all those details, but in general, it follows who's spending the money. And so as long as the public entity is spending the money, then they're required to follow the public bid law. All right. Volunteer fire departments, this is just a general thing here. Public bid law, they don't have to follow the public bid law. Volunteer fire department. Yeah, sometimes they're called a volunteer fire department, but really they are a legit fire department that gets funding from the state or the parish, okay, or some tax revenue, okay. That's a wholly different story. They still maintain that volunteer fireman title, although they're not truly volunteer, they're paying firemen now, okay. So understand that there is that little quirk out there. All right, public works, I'm gonna just jump into it. Public works projects are construction, renovation, alteration, improvement of immovable property. Okay, that's a lot of words in it with shun or whatever, but basically if you're building something, okay, you're renovating something, you're attaching something to land permanently, it's considered a public work, okay? And so those are the projects that have to be let out for bid. The current threshold amount, though, is $250,000. So if your project's under $250,000, the public bid law doesn't apply as far as the certain bidding requirements and advertisements. So, excuse me, these are just examples of what's considered public works, remodeling, construction, utilities, things like that. And I have opinions cycled all throughout this that speak to what I'm saying. So if you want, you can always go to ag.state.la.gov and get our opinions. All of our legal opinions are on our website, and you can look that up yourself. But you can also trust what I have in there as well. That's just it's not law, but it's just a general synopsis of what was said within that. There is some legislation or a bill out there right now that may increase the public works threshold amount to $1 million. So if that happens, I mean, that could take a lot of the projects that maybe you're thinking about doing out of these requirements. So there'll obviously be an update after the legislative session. But I think that bill is still passing through either the House or it moved over to the Senate. But when you're calculating the total cost, that threshold amount, these are the categories that you got to think about to determine whether or not you're hitting that $250,000. It's labor, materials, equipment, and administrative overhead. Okay, that's what you have to factor in to say to give a good estimate of the probable construction cost. And if you get close to that $250,000, you might as well advertise it. You might as well do the public bid law, because there's no guarantee that you're going to get any quotes or responses that are under that $250,000. Now, there's the potential you could estimate it with some engineers or architects or what have you, and maybe they say it's 200. That's fine. You can take your shot at it. But if you don't get any responses that are below $250,000, you have to let it out for bid. Okay. So services are not required to be let out for bid. However, there are local ordinances, maybe. There are some scattered throughout Title 33, which involves local government. And so, for instance, solid waste transportation is one of those things that it's a service, but the statutes say that you have to let it out for bid if there's a franchise, exclusive franchise agreement being offered. So there are little quirks like that. I know that's a little, y'all aren't really concerned about those things, but just know that there could be something special to your agency. So just because I said it's only public works and materials and supplies, there could be something service related that's required by statute. Maintenance contracts, this is something where if you're having a recurring expense annually, maybe it costs around $300,000 and it's the same stuff you're doing each year, you can go about that through a negotiated contract with a provider, a vendor, a bidder, a contractor, okay? It's possible to do that. However, there's certain requirements to be able to fit into this maintenance exception. The contract has to be for at least 2 years. It has to have a non-appropriation clause, which basically says that if us, the public agency, does not have the funds or does not get appropriated money to pay for this contract, it's null and void. We're out of it. Okay, so you have to have that non-appropriation clause in there. That's something for the attorneys to know, but that's still important for you to understand that you can't extend out this period of time that you're going to contract with these people, because then it's considered debt. Okay, if it's over a year, it could be considered debt, and that's a whole nother avenue with the State Bond Commission and things like that. So it's got to be for 1 year. it has to be for at least 2 years for a fixed annual fee, okay? And so as long as you have this maintenance that's recurring every year, for instance, ports, dredges, they dredge those ports. That's expensive cost, but it's recurring. It's an annual thing. And so it's something that can be accomplished through a maintenance contract. Additionally, it's not considered public work. Just generally, it appears to be a public work, though. So, like I said, if there's something you have a question about, this opinion from 2021 is a good example of how we interpret those types of maintenance contracts. If you're interested in doing something like that, is it public work or maintenance? You got to make that determination. But if it's something that happens each year, it's likely maintenance. But if it's something that, hey, this is something we've been working towards, that's likely just something you can't accomplish through a maintenance contract. The uniform bid form is let out by the Division of Administration. They're the ones that draft how it appears. The things that are on that form are required to be, there's a response required, okay? If somebody does not provide a response to those questions on there, and these are the items up there, they're also on the form. If a response is not provided for each one of those things, it's deemed non-responsive. That bid that you receive is deemed non-responsive. I want to say that again. If somebody doesn't sign their bid, okay, yeah, all the identifying information's there. Their name, their number, their email address, everything. They provide the bid security, everything, but they forgot to sign the bid. It's deemed non-responsive. You have to reject the bid, okay? It's as simple as that. That's how technical the public bid law is. If people don't follow the black letter law, it gets so technical, I'll even tell you, like if somebody scratches out a number and they write a new number and they forget to initial by the scratch out, and you can still read the scratch out number, you have to go with the scratched out number. You can't go with the new number. That's how technical it is. And so I'm not going to go into all those details, but that's the types of things that have to occur. So when you're reviewing a bid, likely won't be you, but a contractor, an engineer or architect, or somebody in the procurement office will review it. But those things have to be all there. The bid security, the main thing though is to make sure the person has the authority to submit the bid. Because think about it. I'm sure some of y'all in here own stock. I'll admit I own stock in AT&T. This is not a promotion of AT&T, but I own stock in AT&T. Do you think that I can submit a bid on behalf of AT&T to Lafourche Parish to do work? No. I'm an owner though, right? That stock means I'm an owner in the company. So the person has to have the authority to be able to submit the bid. And there's requirements there, okay? Even if it's a sole proprietor. What I mean by that is a person that owns their own business. They didn't file anything with the Secretary of State. It's just on the back of a napkin or in a notebook. That's how they keep up with their records. They cut grass, they do landscaping, they do plumbing, whatever it may be, whatever the services may be, okay, the sole proprietor, they still have to submit something saying, I, Brett Robinson, am the owner of Brett Robinson Realty. I have the authority to submit a bid on behalf of Brett Robinson Realty, okay? And that's it. That's all it takes. So, yeah, it sounds foolish, but how do we know? You have to verify that the person submitting the bid is who they are and has the authority to submit that bid on behalf of the company. There's plenty of examples of how people have tried to, basically get away from the law or use the law to their advantage. For instance, when it comes to maintenance contracts, sometimes the vendor signs a bad deal, and the city, the town, the parish, whoever gets a great deal, right? And they're supposed to be repairing something, every year, and it turns out that this year, every year for the past 10 years, it's been $300,000, but this year it's $1 million. And guess what? You're the parish entity or the political entity is only on the hook for $300,000. So it's not on you, okay, to make that determination and say, well, that's not fair. Okay, if that's what the word of the contract says, if it's in the advantage of the public entity, that's the way it rolls. Now, the flip side is, if somebody can protest against the way a bid was administered. Okay, if the lowest responsible and responsive bidder is not awarded the contract, and another vendor bidder has a problem with it, or a third party that witnessed the whole bidding process has a problem with it, they can file a complaint, okay? They can file a complaint with the Attorney General's office. It comes through the public finance section. We review those types of complaints to enforce the public bid law. Mainly, we're looking at whether or not the political subdivision followed the law, whether they said it's a mandatory bid, pre-bid conference. If it's a mandatory pre-bid conference, then all the bidders have to sign in to that bid conference that you had that's mandatory. If somebody submits a bid that was not a part of that mandatory pre-bid conference, you have to reject their bid, okay? Same thing when it comes to authority of the bidder. Remember, I just told you, you have to have something saying, I, the owner, have the authority to submit a bid. Well, maybe I own part of a company and I signed in under Brett Robinson Realty when really I'm a part of a joint venture, another group, another working group where I have 2 or 3 other people that we work together under BAR Realty or whatever it may be, and I want to submit a bid under that instead of just Brett Robinson Realty. I know I'm confusing you. I should just use Acme and XYZ and widgets. It's a lot easier. But basically what I'm saying is you have to make sure that the person has the authority, and that can be contested. And so, just understand that it goes both ways. And there's many other things. For instance, with the public works, probable construction cost is the main thing. If you go over $250,000, it has to be let out for bid. Advertisements, you have to advertise at least 3 times. Okay, the first one cannot, and this is, I didn't come up with this. The first advertisement cannot be on a weekend or a legal holiday. Okay. Also, you can't accept bids on a weekend or legal holiday. Okay. The post office has to be running on the day that you're accepting the bid. If the post office doesn't run, but FedEx and UPS runs, you need to turn that bid away. Don't accept it. Tell them, hey, I can't accept this, unfortunately. Okay. That's another important detail. Now, maybe y'all have come up with the specifications, an architect or engineer did. Maybe there's a project y'all been working towards, and you finally had the funds ready to go, and you let out the bid. And you realize, wait a minute, we have a little more money than we expected. We can do this add-on. We can do this instead. You can do what's called an addendum and amend your bid specifications, okay, to add that work. Now, if you make an amendment or addendum to your bid specifications, there are certain rules that go with that, okay? If you do an addendum within 72 hours of the bid opening date, I know this is technical, but if you do it within 72 hours of the bid opening date, you have to postpone the bid opening, okay? No questions asked. Postpone the bid opening at least 7 working days, okay? Why do I say that? Because when you issue an addendum, you have to give an opportunity to the bidders, the potential bidders, to be able to amend their actual bid and take into account what you've added or what you've taken out or what spec you changed. And so that allows them the opportunity to actually take that into consideration, what changes you made. Now, if it's outside of 72 hours, let's say it's within 7 days or outside of 7 days, well then you have to make sure that you get that addendum to everybody within 24 hours, or else you do need to amend the bid opening date. So if you do it within 7 days, but it's outside of the 72 hours, then you have to amend the bid opening date if you issue an addendum and can't get it to everybody within that 24-hour period. Real technical, I won't go over any more of the public bid law stuff. I'll switch over to materials and supplies, which luckily in 2022, it went into effect in 2023. The materials and supplies threshold was increased to $60,000 and above. Prior to that time, it was anything over $30,000. And so that was a big change. Inflation came and the legislature realized we got some issues, and so they bumped it up. And so it used to be $10,000 or below, but now it's $30,000. Below $30,000, there is no specific requirements. Now, I'm going to tell you that the legislative auditor is going to want to see that you try to get multiple responses, okay? You can't just go and say, Jerry's down the street's going to be the mechanic, okay, or well, mechanics service, but Jerry down the street is gonna provide all the widgets, okay? Well, no, maybe there are other widget makers around here and they're cheaper or could do a cheaper price. Understand this, you don't have to be a math guy or finance woman or anything like that to understand this principle that if you're purchasing more of something, it generally, the cost of it goes down the more of it you're purchasing, okay? It's just an efficiency thing. And so just understand that just because you've been getting a deal from the same vendor each year, it's good practice to shop that out each year and not just keep going with the same person. Same thing if you have engineers that you're using, and this is just related to services, engineers or architects, that's something also you want to rotate around. You don't want to keep that really with one particular person. And it's not saying that they're biased or anything like that. It's just, it's good practice to move it around just to get different eyeballs on that type of deal. So, but materials and supplies between $30,000 and $60,000, you have to get at least 3 quotes, okay? Now, sometimes it can be difficult to get 3 quotes. I consider going on the internet, pulling up a website, could be Amazon, it could be the actual manufacturer, and getting a quote on a product, okay, how many I need, and getting it all priced out. Now you gotta think about taxes though. You're generally, you know, there's some taxes that won't be charged because you're a public entity. But that would be a good enough indication of what a quote would be. So if you can get them to verify what the quote would be, okay, that's great. But I think if you have a snapshot of going to a website and pulling up how much the cost is per unit for a particular material or supply, then that would be sufficient. Now, something that you purchase periodically throughout the year, there's a little bit different process with that because you know, you don't know how many widgets, we'll call them tires. You don't know how many tires you need, right? And so maybe this year's a little bit different, but in practice, you know, it's been going over that $60,000 amount, or it could be close to that $60,000 amount. You have to do a special type of bidding procedure, and it's not really that different. But basically, you're letting out this bid, and they have to give you a quote of how much they're going to charge you throughout the whole rest of the year for this particular widget, okay? And so throughout the year, you draw off that contract the amount of things that you agreed. Typically, you give an estimate before. You say, you know, we typically need 30,000 widgets, 30,000 tires, okay? So whoever's bidding can give you a good ballpark. Use that efficiency and say, all right, we'll do it for $100 a tire, all right? So then all throughout the year, you go to that particular vendor that was the lowest bidder, lowest responsible and responsive bidder, and you draw off that contract, okay? Otherwise, it could be tied to a market. I'm not going to get into that, but there are ways to do the bids to where it's flexible with the price if it's a commodity being like a vegetable, fruit, or anything that can be sold, a product that could be sold, you know, oil and gas, things like that. So that's materials and supplies really in a nutshell. I'm trying to think, there was something I wanted to touch on. Yes, sir.
We're a hospital service district and we have a GPO.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad you said that.
we're exempt from this?
Yes, not all of this. So hospital service districts and school boards have an exception. I'm glad you asked that because the exception is you can engage in cooperative purchasing, okay? And basically what happens then, and this is good for everybody else to know because they're very aggressive. They will sell you, I promise you. I get tons of questions and calls about particular groups. For instance, Sourcewell's one. There's another one in Houston. There's several of them, and they'll sell you on it. And they'll say, look, you can purchase off of our price list. No, you can't unless you're a hospital service district or a school board or school. So basically what happens for a hospital service district, there has to be at least, I want to say it's 2 more hospitals that are part of that group, whatever they're considering to be a co-op, and then you can purchase from them as well. When it comes to school districts, I want to say it's 5 schools or school districts. It may just be 1. I may have that on here, but that's a good thing to know. It doesn't exempt you though from Public Works. Don't get that mistaken. And then materials and supplies, if they don't have those material supplies on there, then you still have to let it out. But I would still try to bid things out and not always go with them, because they're usually using a couple vendors, and there may be some local people that would provide a better price. There's even a little exception for locals to be able to offset the price of delivery and shipping of their actual items. Opening of the bids, whenever you open bids, regardless of whether it's Public Works, materials and supplies, you only want to say the numbers. You don't want to say this is the best bid, this is the lowest price, anything like that. Don't give any kind of indication of who's going to win the bid, and don't tell anybody that their bid's going to be rejected unless it's blatant. For instance, you got to have your contractor's license number on the outside of your bid form, bid envelope. If somebody fails to do that, you can tell them that you're going to reject it because of that. You're not even supposed to open those bids, okay, if that's evident. So if it's defective already, don't open that bid. Also, this is just a weird thing that comes up, and chance that it happens to y'all. For whatever reason, we do have electronic bidding. And so there could be a website that takes your bids. That website could be down at the time that you're supposed to do a bid opening. It could be for various different reasons. Same thing, it could be a live deal where you misplaced a bid. You misplaced the bid, okay, for whatever reason. So if the website's down, you can't get all the bids, or you misplaced a bid that you have a receipt, that you received the bid for this particular project, and you don't have their bid, you postpone that bid opening until the website's available and you can locate the other bid, or at least contact the bidder and verify, and they can provide you with something. You have to delay the bid opening. Do not go forward with the bid opening and then accept a bid from outside that time. I'm trying to think if there was reverse auctions. It's something I think is cool. I don't know if y'all would be interested in doing it, but it is available. Basically, reverse auction is where you pit the vendors against each other. And so you have it on a website. It's all anonymous, and whatever you need, you put up there and you say, look, it's $10,000 or $10, per widget. That's our top offer. And then everybody that has widgets, that makes widgets, they can bid against each other. I'll do it for $9.50. I'll do it for $9.25 until you get the lowest price. So you put that out there, you get the lowest price through active bidding. And so that's why it's a reverse auction. I like it because it's efficient, and some people, they know they can make a profit. It's just how much profit do they want, and do they want the business? So that's the public bid law in a nutshell. There are a lot of other things. I know y'all have my materials. I hope I didn't lose y'all. I think I only saw one person fall asleep. So, but I promise you, Les is more animated, and he's a great public speaker, and y'all forget about me. But I'll stick around if y'all have any specific questions about public bid law. I'm happy to take them. But thank y'all.
Thanks, Brett. We appreciate it.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by South Louisiana Bank. It's better when we bank together. Waits and Downer, attorneys at law. Terrebonne Ford, built Ford tough.
Next will be Assistant Attorney General Les Terrio, who will discuss open meetings and public records. He will be very entertaining because he is from Golden Meadow, right?
Yeah, I'm Les Terrio. I'm an Assistant Attorney General with the Attorney General Liz Murrell. I am from Golden Meadow, and then I went to Nichols for my undergrad, accounting and finance, and then LSU Law, and I've been with the AG's office ever since. I asked that Brett go first because he has to drive back to Baton Rouge. I'm living in Thibodeau right now, so I have a way shorter drive. So I do apologize just because I'll be talking about two topics. Both pertain to what we call sunshine laws, the laws that require the government to be transparent with the public. This original presentation is about 2 hours long. I'm not going to take 2 hours, but I want to get through it. I want to show y'all some stuff. So there's some things that I'd like to just disclaim at the get-go. I can't offer legal advice. You know, if you have a question that's really specific to you, I can't really answer that in front of everybody. Because we're short on time, what I'm going to do is just a broad legal overview. And also, I'm not going to explain the law in a way where you can say, this is just what I need to do to comply with the law. What we're going to talk about tonight are best practices to comply with the law. You know, that when you do this, you're going to build trust with the public. You're going above what the law is requiring, all right, above the minimum. The agenda that I have is just do an overview of the Sunshine Laws, and then we'll get into the topic that I love, because for the past 3 years I've been the public records coordinator for the office, the Public Records Law. And I think it's the best topic to talk about because all of us in this room, any government official, deals with the Public Records Law, because at the end of the day we make records, right? All of us make records in fulfilling our duties. And then I'll talk about the Open Meetings Law, and then if we have time, which we will, I'll make sure, because you know, y'all have me now. I'm in control. We'll cover Lagniappe, which is basically I have some more tips, and I want to talk about some bills that are being brought this legislative session that pertain to both public records and open meetings. All right? Okay. So, the purpose of the law. The Sunshine Law, or laws, come from a constitutional right that individuals have in Louisiana. This right's in Article 12, Section 3 of the Constitution, and it says that no person shall be denied the right to observe the deliberations of public bodies or examine public documents except in cases established by law. There's two actions there that the public has a right in this right. There's two verbs. One is that they can observe the deliberations of public bodies, and that's going to be the Open Meetings Law, and the other is that they can examine public documents, the Public Records Law. So they have a right to observe you when you work, and they have a right for all of your records except in cases established by law. And of course, if you go to law school, you know that all the exceptions swallow the rules. So the rule is that, at least for public records law, you can examine public documents. I can see everything that you do except in cases established by law. So what is that law? The Public Records Law is found in Title 44 of the Revised Statutes, which is covering public records recorders. So that's going to be like clerks of court, all that stuff. Chapter 1 is the Public Records Law. And in Chapter 1, my favorite section of Chapter 1, Section 4.1, says that we want the public to be aware of all instances where they cannot view a record, right? So any exception to the law, exemption, or limitation, the public gets to know. And so the rule is it has to be in Chapter 1 of Title 44. It has to be in the Public Records Law. If it's not in there, it doesn't count. So if you're a member of the public, all you have to do is look at Chapter 1 and you're good. Finally, there's an interpretive rule. How do you interpret the rules and the Public Records Law? The rule is that unless the legislature put in Chapter 1 an exception or an exemption, if there's any doubt, you have to let the record out. So for a record to be withheld, it has to fall squarely within that exception. There's no doubt that the legislature intended this record not to go out. If it's iffy, you got to let it out, right? Open Meetings Law kind of runs the same way, right? So again, the public can observe the deliberations of public bodies except in cases established by law. The Open Meetings Law is found in Title 42, which covers public officers and employees, and it's Chapter 1A. And there's an interpretive part of the statutes, which is that any public business has to be performed in an open manner. And that if you're in a situation where you can operate closed or open, you need to operate openly. So that means try not to meet. If it's going to be considered an open meeting, which we'll talk about later, make sure that you're following the Open Meetings Law. So we're going to start with the Public Records Law. The Public Records Law, just very basically, when does the Public Records Law kick in? Public Records Law kicks in whenever a requester makes a request to a custodian for a public record. So just to break that down, a requester in the law is not defined. All we know is that they have to be over 18. So if somebody over 18 makes a request, there's no rule that it has to be a form. We do know that factually for a request to be litigated, there has to be a writing, right, saying that a request was made this day. But a request has to be made. So a requester makes a request to a custodian. A custodian is going to be the appointed or elected official of a public body, and all of us are members of public bodies, right? Boards, commissions, agencies, right? The custodian is the appointed or elected official or their designee. If a requester makes a request to a custodian for a public record, then the Public Records Law kicks in. And when the public records law kicks in, you have a ministerial duty. There's no discretion. You have to respond with the records that they request. And best practice would be always to respond also with a writing, and we'll talk about what you need to write on it. And you have to do so within the time period, which is 5 days, okay? Now, very quickly, people always freak out because they might get a big request and it's going to take longer than 5 days to review everything that the person's asking for. What do? You just write to the requester within those first 5 days saying, hey, what you're asking, we cannot comply with the 5-day thing. A reasonable estimate is 4 weeks, 30 days, however long, okay? Now, one thing that I kept out of here is that when the public records law kicks in, it's because a requester makes a request to a custodian for a public record. But what is a public record? The definition of a public record, I hate just because it's a long sentence. I hate long sentences. So I have on the slide just kind of a breakdown of what a public record is. On the left side of the slide is what's a record, which is pretty much anything that's recorded. So a book, a map, a PDF, a letter, a photo, a video, audio recording, electronically stored information in a computer, such as metadata in an email. So like if you send an email with a read receipt, you know, that read receipt of when they read it counts as a public record. But for it to be, so that's a record, but for it to be considered a public record, it has to be for state business. And kind of, I break down the definition of what state business means. You used it, you are using it, or you will be using this record in the conduct, transaction, or performance of any business, transaction, duty that you have to do under the authority of the law. Or you're dealing with state dollars or parish dollars, right? You're dealing with public dollars. Any records talking about the receipt or the payment of dollars, those are public records. So I'm not going to really do audience participation, but is this presentation a public record? Thank you. It is, right? It's a record, it's a presentation, and I'm using it right now in the performance of my duty, which I'm conducting under the authority of the state law. The state law here is that our office, 4431.2, our office is the mandatory educator of the public records law to custodians and all that. So any records that I make in fulfilling this duty are public records, right? Now, I want to push on the point of what is and what isn't a public record and make sure that y'all are aware of everything that's included in a public record. One is that sometimes we communicate via our public email. I don't know if y'all use public email, or sometimes we communicate with our private email. Sometimes we text, right? The rule is that if it's about state business, if it's that latter part of the definition, you're using it, you did, it's this record that was used for state business in the performance of your duties, it counts as a public record. So it doesn't matter if you send this email from your Gmail account or your Yahoo account or your viscom.net account. It doesn't matter if you're texting it. Those are records. If it's about state business, it counts. And we have a case recently where I say recently, it was a few years ago, some councilmen, it was a public bid situation, they had some text. They didn't produce the text in response to a public records request, and they were fined for not producing those texts. On the other end, if you're using a public email, but you're doing something privately on it, it doesn't count as a public record because it doesn't fit the definition of a public record. So, for an example, I pulled my emails. On the left is an email that I sent to our librarian asking her to spend money on a book that I want, Project Management Electronic Discovery. I'm a very interesting person. We were using state dollars for it, right? And so it's a public record. On the right, I sent an email to a coworker saying that I had Dong Fong King cake in my office if she wanted a piece. And she said, no, she's good, right? Dong Fong I get every year. I order 24 cakes every year from Dong Fong because if you order 25, they think you're reselling it and they can cancel your order, so 24. Dong Fong is special to me. I don't just leave it out in the conference room for people to take. I email people from my work email. Are all those emails public records? No, it's not about state business. I didn't use state dollars, I use my pay. So all those emails, even though it's on a public server, they're not public record, right? But if I were emailing about coming here tonight, right, fulfilling my duty, educating the public, and it was from my Yahoo account, that may be considered a public record. It is a public record because I'm using it for state business, right? Hey, I need the car for this tonight, right? Okay. So one more point when it comes to just public records of when the public records law kicks in is that The public records law kicks in whenever the request is made to a custodian, right? And the custodian is going to be the appointed or elected official. In some cases, that custodian is going to have employees working under them. For instance, if somebody makes a public records request to our office, the Department of Justice, that request is made to Attorney General Liz Murrill. There are 530 people, I think, that work at our office right now, right? A lot of people making records. It is not on the Attorney General to go through our records and, do everything, right? Providing access to public records is a responsibility and duty of everybody, including the employees underneath, right? So it's not just on the custodian itself. Everybody good there? Okay. So, public records law kicks in, you get a request. What do? The first thing really to do is to examine and review the request itself to see if there's any limitations on it. So big limitations on public records requests are that they're too large. And really since a few years ago, we noticed that the number of requests that custodians are getting is growing, and the scope of the requests is growing. And so the legislature has responded by updating the law and allowing custodians to deal with large requests that they can't really handle. The first statute, 4433A2, says that if a request will require you to do something unreasonably burdensome or expensive, meaning you'll have to hire somebody to change your programming to give them the record, or you'll have to redo your whole file room, you can deny the request and say that what you're asking for is unreasonably burdensome, we can't do it. 4432A2 is more whenever the request itself is large. If the request is so large you don't even know what they want, or if it's so large that it's going to take so many man-hours that it would disrupt required government operations, you can go to the requester and say, this is disruptive, we need you to narrow or specify the request, and you do that a few times. Only after reasonable attempts of you seeking to narrow or specify the request could you deny the request as disruptive or just too large that you don't even know what they want. So that's large requests. There's some limitations. You can't ask for too much stuff. When it comes to electronic databases, it's more of a thing of you don't have a duty to produce stuff that does not exist. There's no duty to create a record which does not exist. But then the law advanced, and we have all these databases that, can people get access to that data? In some instances, yes. In some instances, no. There's been cases where custodians have had to release data to people. One, because it was easy to do. You just export it, right? And two, the data itself was public, right? It wasn't private stuff. It wasn't crazy stuff. It was just all public. But really, at the end of the day, production's mandated. If you can't really export it easily, that person can't ask for that record, okay? Another sort of limitation when it comes to accessing public records is the way in which somebody wants to access the record. So there's three ways that I like to reduce it down to how do you access records. One is that you inspect it. The requester comes and inspects it. Two is that the requester comes and reproduces the record with their own stuff. Or three, they want the custodian to make a copy for them, okay? When it comes to inspecting the record, the rules are you have to allow somebody to inspect the record. So you have to extend all reasonable comfort and facility. You can do what's necessary to keep that person from altering the record. And there's been instances where somebody wants to see a spreadsheet, and the custodian says, I don't want them to play with the spreadsheet. So it's, well, they just go sit at the desk, you turn the screen, show them, and you move the mouse for them, all that. It's limited to regular or office working hours, but if they do want to do overtime and you're okay with doing overtime, you can charge for the overtime to stay late to let them look at the records, okay? When it comes to reproducing and copying records, kind of the big thing that everybody wants to talk about are fees. And I'll just I usually just chew people out, so I'll just do that right now. Providing public records is a service. It's a duty that you have, and it's a service that you offer for free. You cannot charge for the time it takes to process a request. If a request is going to take 60 man-hours to go through everything, that's a duty that you have. It's a service that you offer for free. You cannot charge people to come to your office and inspect it, right? We're not a bar, there's no cover charge. You can't charge when people come and when they inspect the records, they reproduce the records, that they have their Adobe Scan app and they just start taking pictures of it. That's their right, and that's a right that they can do for free. You can only charge if you as the custodian are making copies for this request, right? The spirit behind the law is that you're spending money on the paper, the ink, and the electricity to make these copies. You wouldn't have made these copies if they didn't make the request, so shouldn't you recoup some of those costs? Yes, you may. So those are the only things that you can really charge for. Now, I'm not speaking to a state agency. I did that Monday. Y'all are not state agencies, so there's some different rules for how you can charge people. One, you don't have to follow the administrative code. You have to charge, or you can charge a fee that's different. It just has to be reasonable. I don't know what reasonable means, but it has to be reasonable. You know when you see it. Two, about 2 years ago, the law changed and was adapted for non-state agencies to say that custodians, you are now going to be able to charge for electronic records. Before you weren't able to, you could only charge for the physical records and those physical copies. Now you're able to charge for the transmission of electronic copies of public records, okay? But what happened was that custodians went crazy with it. You tell me I can charge for, electronic records? So they started charging, and turns out they were charging different prices for different people for the same records, right? Advocate, I don't really like you. It's going to be $3 per page for all these emails that you want. Ms. Janet from Chalmette, we love you, 20 cents a page, right? Same records, different prices. And so the law changed last year, got updated, saying that if you are going to charge for electronic records, you have to have a fee schedule saying what are you going to charge depending on the record, and it has to be posted on your website or in a public place, publicly available, so that any requester who's making a request will know how much they're going to get charged. In the sense of, we know it's going to be so much per page, so much per gigabyte. Other than that, it's still reasonable charges, so it's up to y'all to do that, but remember you have to post that fee schedule, okay? All right. Whenever we're talking about fees and time spent working on requests, it's because custodians are reviewing records for something, right? You go through all the limitations and now you have to produce these records. What you're reviewing for are exceptions and exemptions. I categorize exceptions and exemptions into 3 categories. One is the statutory exceptions. So those are going to be the exceptions that we talked about. They're in the statute. 44, 4.1 is my favorite section of the public records law because of how crazy it is. It starts out by saying we want the public to be aware of all exceptions and exemptions, and so the rule is it has to be in Chapter 1. This is about how thick Chapter 1 is if you print it out on type 12 font, okay? And then right after, 44, 4.1b comes in and says, in order to do that, we are going to cite all the parts of the Louisiana law that mention where a record is accepted from it. And then it pulls from all the titles of the revised statutes and all the different codes, criminal procedure, civil procedure, children's code, and puts puts the statutes where this record that we're talking about is confidential, is exempt from the public record. And when you compile all that and you print it out in type 12 font, it's about yay big. It's thick, 600-something pages. If you compile all the laws, all the exceptions and exemptions, all the statutes that talk about stuff, and it goes through everything. So the big tip is that your public body deals with your own records. I don't know your records. You probably don't know my records. Christina and I probably have more of the same records because we're both prosecuting agencies. The tip is to go through the areas of the law that affect you. If you're a school board, Title 17 affects you. That's the education title. So you should go in 44, 4.1b and look up the titles that affect you or all the codes that affect you and see if any of those exceptions apply to records that you deal with a lot. And then, make a cheat sheet. I have a cheat sheet for my office because I don't deal with a lot of other stuff, right? So I have the cheat sheet of the exceptions that I deal with the most.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by Alford and Associates for all of your insurance needs. CIS, Cardiovascular Institute of the South, the highest quality cardiovascular care available. Barker Honda, the Barker family tradition of quality.
So that's statutory exceptions, right? That's a cool exercise to do, and it really sets you up for handling public records requests better and more quickly. The next category is privilege, which, again, it's funny because the rule is that it has to be in Chapter 1. If it's not in Chapter 1, it doesn't count. But then we have privilege, which is not in Chapter 1, but it counts. So the only privilege that is in Chapter 1 is attorney work product. It's in 44.4.1c. But what if you're communicating with your attorney on something, right? According to the public records law, those communications are public record and there's no exemption because there's no statute doing that, right? But it's privileged. You still don't have to produce that if you get a public records request for it, right? You can still withhold it. And it's because courts recognize that if you don't have to produce it in litigation, right? You don't have to produce, if you get sued, you don't have to produce the communications with your attorney because it's privileged. If you don't have to do that in litigation, you don't have to do that in response to public records requests, okay? So that's privilege. The final category of exceptions is the constitutional exceptions, which is mentioned in Chapter 1. It has to be in Chapter 1 or the Constitution. We're not going to talk about the legislative privilege, but we are going to talk about the constitutional privacy right. So Article 1, Section 5 of the Louisiana Constitution gives individuals, and it recognizes that individuals have a right to be free from unreasonable invasions of privacy. As a custodian, you might be dealing with sensitive records that contain private information about people, right, about an individual, that if you were to release it, might subject that person to an invasion of privacy. It might be just information that's just private, right, and that all of society thinks is private. You can withhold that information from the public, and you just cite the law, Article 1, Section 5, and say that it's private, okay? Now, I'm not suggesting you do that for everything because there are things, especially when you are dealing with public information and people submitting information to the government, there's no expectation of privacy, right? And so there's cases all over about how to deal with this. Now, I'm not going to get into that part, really, but I do want to say that in our office, we do cite Article 1, Section 5, and we do redact stuff a lot. And the reason is because of the identity theft statute. So there's a crime in Louisiana of identity theft, which says that if you use anybody's personal identifying information to fraudulently gain something from it using it, you're committing identity theft. Personal identifying information is defined in the identity theft statute, and it's a illustrative list, meaning it's not just everything within it, you know, anything beyond it that's like it. And it lists out all these pieces of information. And I don't know if you really could see it, but I have some stuff highlighted in red. And the stuff that's highlighted in red are pieces of information that the public records law has no exceptions for right now. So mother's maiden name, digital signature number, let's see, birth certificate, date of birth. These are pieces of information that if somebody were to get it, they could probably steal your identity. And so it's kind of weird that as a custodian, we'd be forced to release information that could cause somebody's identity to be stolen. And so what our office does is we'll redact those pieces of information and we'll say, hey, you know, we don't want somebody's identity stolen. This is protect their privacy, Article 1, Section 5, and we withhold it, right? Okay. Now, the main thing before I get into the enforcement part that I want to talk about is that there are instances, and the best practice is to always write to the requester with information about their request, right? So when they make the request within the 5 days, if it's going to take longer than 5 days, get back with them. But the other big thing to remember is that the requester has to know that when they submit that request, what they're going to get is the records that they want. And if they can't get the records that they want or some of the records that they want, the reason why they can't get it. And so whenever you're responding to a request, give them the records that they can get. And if there are certain records that are exempt or there's an exception for it, you have to write to the requester and say, we are withholding these records, and you have to say what exception allows you to do that. You have to cite the law that allows you to do that. So then the requester knows that I can get this, I can't get this because there's a law that says I can't, okay? Let's say you don't do that. You can get sued. 4435 is the enforcement statute. There's two ways that you can get sued. One is that it's your final determination. Requester wants some records. You tell the requester you're not getting it. And the requester thinks that, no, they should, so they're going to sue you. Or you just fail to respond within that 5-day period. If either of those things happen, typically what people do is they file a writ of mandamus. And a writ of mandamus is directing an official to fulfill some ministerial duty. So I want to stress that. Whenever you get a public records request, there is no discretion. You can't just do what you want. You have a ministerial duty to give them those records. If you fail to do so, most typically the requester is going to file a writ of mandamus directing you to give them the records. If you lose, you will have to pay attorney's fees and costs of litigation. If the requester thinks that you are acting arbitrary or capricious, meaning you're treating them differently than other people, you're just being kind of weird with them, not fulfilling your ministerial duty, they can seek damages. If you're failing to respond arbitrarily, they can seek penalties, okay? Also, if you violate the chapter, you can be fined and convicted for violating the chapter, right? Now, the legislature did add a standard to it. Again, you have to be acting arbitrary, basically not acting in good faith. And whenever that happens, then you may be convicted or fined. And that, oh yeah, let me just close out with some public records best practices. If you really want to do a great job with your public records requests, make sure that you have on your website or just somewhere contact information for the public to see you and to know where to submit requests. Have some policies inside of like who handles the requests, how do we receive requests. Make your cheat sheet for your exceptions, right? Always communicate with the requester. Have your fee schedule if you're going to charge it and put it on the website with the contact information. And I think if you do all that, you'll be good. And I have it at the end, but manage your records well. And if I could say, like, if a third of you go to Baton Rouge, once a month the Secretary of State does records management training, and I highly recommend somebody going from your public body to it and talking with them. It may seem boring, but it's really great, and it's very informative, and whoever goes is going to come back probably wanting to change how y'all operate, you know, just everything they all do. All right, moving on to the open meetings law. The open meetings law kicks in whenever a public body, a quorum of a public body meets, whenever they convene, right? Whenever a quorum of a body convenes, that's when they meet. So let's just break it down. A public body, again, is going to be basically all the public bodies that we have in the public records law. So a town authority, parish authority, a committee, a board, a commission, all those are public bodies that are subject to the open meetings law. Whenever a quorum of the members of the public body, and a quorum is just going to be a majority of the members of the public body, convene. And convening is really just getting together, assembling. It doesn't have to be physical. It could be electronic, which I'll talk about in a second. But if a quorum of a public body convenes to deliberate on something that they have jurisdiction over or power over, right? Something within their scope of power, if they're deliberating on something, if they're acting on something, or if they are receiving information about something in which they have jurisdiction over. If any of those three things are happening, that a quorum of a public body is together convening, you have a meeting. And that meeting is subject to the open meetings law, okay? To convene includes a walking quorum. A walking quorum is a way that some public bodies try to get around the open meetings law. And so a walking quorum is illegal, and we do recognize that when this happens, it is a quorum, right? And so you have to follow the open meetings law. A walking quorum is whenever, let's say we have a public body that has 7 people, right? So a quorum is going to be 4 people. If 4 people meet to deliberate, act, or receive information about something that's within their jurisdiction, that's a meeting, right? Subject to the open meetings law. But let's say of these 4 people, they don't actually meet. They don't get together, right? But I talk with 2 of you, right? So there's 3. It's not a quorum. And then I walk away, and then I go walk to that gentleman over there. He's the 4th person, right? 4 people never meet simultaneously, but I'm deliberating with y'all, or I'm acting, you know, we're trying to do something. I'll go over there and do the same thing with him. That you're trying to avoid having to do the open meetings law, that's a violation of the open meetings law because technically there's a quorum. Same thing, and we have opinions on this of if you're emailing. If we have an email like this, and then one of you forwards the email to a 4th person, and there's this chain going on, and we're deliberating, and we're acting on something within our jurisdiction, that's considered a walking quorum, and it's illegal. Now, in our opinions, we talk about, you know, if you have a constituent reach out to y'all and give you information, I mean, you can't really control people emailing you, right? So there are some instances where it doesn't really mean a walking quorum. Whenever we talk about walking quorums, it's really looking at the facts, and at the end of the day, you can tell who's trying to get around the open meetings law and who's not. But yes, so be aware of that. So let's say there's a quorum, right, and y'all want to meet. What do you have to do? The open meetings law is intended to make sure that the citizens are able to observe the deliberations of public bodies. And that means that the citizens have to be advised of when a public body is going to be meeting, when a quorum of a public body is going to be convening. So basically, it's just you have to invite the public to go, be able to go to your meeting. Some bodies, according to laws that are applicable to them or ordinances, have to report at the beginning of the year all the schedule of their regular meetings, right? You have to say the date, time, and place that you're going to be doing that. But for any meeting, right, regular, special, a rescheduled meeting, you have to invite the public to that meeting. You can't just meet. So what does this invitation have to look like? When do you have to do it? The invitation has to be done at least 24 hours before the meeting, so it gives people a day to see. It has to have enough information on the invitation for this, for the public to, RSVP, to go to it. So it has to have the date, the time, the place. It has to say what you're discussing so that the public can go whenever they actually are interested in it. You have to post it and put this notice, this invitation, in public places. I can give you all the rules of the minimum way to comply, but I'm not going to do that because it's going to take too much time. Best practice is to post it everywhere. You post it at the place where you're actually meeting, more than 24 hours before. You post it at your primary office, if your primary office is different from where you're meeting. You post it on your website. You post it in the official journal, and you hand it out to media that typically want this, want the invite. Even better practice is if anybody is asking for this, agendas and all that, give it out. You have to do some sort of notification like that. Best practice is to just put it everywhere. Included in this invitation, in this notice, is your agenda. And just very quickly, agendas can't be bare bones. They have to have a sufficient description as to what you're talking about, split up. And you can't change what the agenda is. You can't blindside the public and talk about something else that's not on the agenda. There's an exception to that. If everybody who's at the meeting unanimously says we're going to add an agenda item, they can, right? But it has to be unanimous. Other than that, the agenda is going to have to just be, have a sufficient description. Kind of this cool tip, there was a bill recently where they're trying to change the way that public bodies notify people. And it's because official journals are not being used by younger folks, right? I don't have a subscription to some of them. Turns out the Press Association came, fought against the bill and spoke against it and said, we already have this technology. So all the official journals throughout the state are a part of the Press Association, and there's this website, LouisianaPublicNotice.com. I signed up. It's the coolest thing ever. You can pick what public bodies you want to get notifications from. You can pick certain keywords of anytime this word's mentioned, I want to know what meetings that are happening. And anytime a notice is put in the official journal for that area, it'll go on this website. And you can get email reminders, whenever it happens. So it's important and it's necessary. It's that you have to put this notice in the official journal, and that's why to get it out. And now that the official journals use this technology, it's really great, right? So you invite the public. You do so more than 24 hours ahead of time. You put the right information on the agenda. You let them know everything that's going to happen. You have to just conduct the meeting now, right? So when the time comes, you conduct the meeting. There are some laws related to how you conduct the meeting. You have to allow the public a comment period before you end up voting on an agenda item. The presiding officer must read the agenda item out loud before discussion of that item. You have to keep minutes of the meeting so that the public's aware of what you discussed. You must keep the meeting open in the sense of throughout the meeting, make sure that the public can access it. You cannot use secret balloting, and you have to vote by voice for anything that you have to vote on, okay? Best practice, whenever we talk about your legal requirements, there has to be a public comment period. You have to keep it open. What does that mean? A best practice would be for each public body, if you're doing an open meeting, you follow a policy and you develop a policy. The law changed last year that is requiring public bodies to create rules to allow, if you have a member of the public body who has a disability, a recognized disability, You have to come up with rules to make sure that that person is able to participate in the meeting. And you have to make rules if you have some just member of the public who wants to come to the meeting. If they have a recognized disability, you have to make rules to ensure that they're able to see the meeting and participate in it. So the fact that we have to make these rules with this new law, might as well just make a policy that addresses all the topics that you have to meet to conduct a legal open meeting. You have to have a procedure for public comment, right? You can put rules of how long somebody speaks, what they're allowed to and what they're not. You have to have general rules of parliamentary procedure. There's some laws that tell you how you need to vote, what's required to vote, but other than that, how do you conduct the meeting? Do you follow Robert's rules? Do you follow your own? A policy would be good with that. The other best practices for conducting an open meeting is to ensure that you're having someone or that you're keeping the minutes of the meeting well, and that they meet the legal requirements, which we'll talk about in a second, and that you are recording the meeting and that you're going to keep that video record available in public, okay? So your minutes include the date, time, and place of the meeting, who was there, who was not, the substance of all matters decided. Basically, just take your agenda and did y'all talk about it? Yes. What were the votes? And you can put that. You don't have to put the votes, but if a member of the public body says, I want these votes in these minutes, I want us to do this, then you have to put that in the meeting minutes. Best practice would be always put the votes in the meeting minutes, who voted for what. And any other information that the public body says, this was important in the meeting, let's put that in the minutes, you put that in the minutes, okay? Pretty simple when it comes to minutes. After an open meeting, you're gonna post on your website the minutes after a reasonable time, whenever you're able to, and you're going to post on your website a video of the meeting if you're able to, okay? There are some exceptions to the open meetings law, and I won't get into it because, it'll just take so much time, but basically, there's two or three types of exceptions I'll talk about. One is executive session, whenever the public doesn't get to hear what you're discussing. There is a law, 42:17, which discusses what allows you to go into executive session. So if you are able to qualify for an executive session, what you do is you put what's being discussed in the executive session without revealing the confidential information in the agenda so that the public knows that this is coming up. You need, at the meeting, a 2/3 vote to enter into that executive session. And once that happens, if you're in a qualified executive session, you're able to kick the public out, just convene privately and discuss it. You cannot vote during executive session. What you do is you discuss the stuff that's confidential, and then you get out of executive session and you vote on it without the public knowing the confidential stuff, but they know the action that you took. The second type of exception is emergency meetings, all right? So if the governor declares a state of emergency or disaster, the laws for how you conduct and how you notify for an open meeting change. The disaster has to be in the area that has to be in Lafourche Parish, right, for you to be able to use the exception for gubernatorial declared disasters. If it's something in Shreveport, you can't just be like, oh my God, we need to meet. So it has to be in your area. When you can only discuss items that are critically important. If there's a disaster or an emergency going on, you can't really just do normal business. You can only really meet to discuss the critical issues. And the law describes what are critical issues, related to the emergency itself. If you need to act to make sure that public services are continuing, any time-sensitive matters, you can do so, right? If you need to meet during a gubernatorial declared disaster or emergency, the way you do it is you invite the public in the best way you can. So 24 hours, at least 24 hours before the meeting, you're going to do whatever you can to post it. The law says that you have to contact any news media outlet and, send the notice to them so that they can broadcast it so that the public's aware. Because our typical notice that we give out, that's just regular business, right? Some people don't have access to your website, but they might have access to the radio, right? So that's the type of notice that you have to give. Finally, the third exception is virtual meetings. So the law changed last year to allow certain public bodies to be able to conduct virtual meetings. During COVID, whenever there was whenever it was a disaster, people were meeting via Zoom or another format. the law changed. Everybody's kind of freaked out about it. The way I look at it and the way I've read it is that it's only certain public bodies that even qualify to be able to do virtual meetings. And so if you're thinking about wanting to do a virtual meeting for your public body and doing that multiple times throughout the year, just see if you even qualify. And if you do qualify, you have to see whether it's prudent, because what you have to do to be able to run a virtual meeting is pretty much double the work. Even if you have a virtual meeting, the chairman of the public body has to be at a location in public so that members of the public could go and be in person and watch the meeting if they want to and participate in, so it's not just virtual, it's both virtual and in person, right? So you have to see if that's a prudent decision you want to do. If you don't follow these laws, if you do a walk-in quorum and all that, we will enforce the law. So who enforces the law? It's both the AG, our office, the district attorney, or anybody who believes that their right to participate and observe the deliberations of public bodies were violated. They have to file a lawsuit, right, which could be a writ of mandamus, a declaratory action, within 60 days of the violation of the open meeting. When it comes to enforcing it, kind of the main thing that we want to get out of it is to make sure that a public body is not acting without the public's observance. And so any actions that this public body may do and vote on, we want to make sure that it's not happening, right? So if somebody says, oh, they voted on this budget, they didn't notify anybody, that what we'll do in our enforcement is make sure that that action is nullified, that that budget is not approved, that they're going to have to go back in an open meeting and approve some budget, right? Okay, so that's enforcement. Lanyap talked about the Secretary of State stuff. I really just want to spend the rest of the time talking about some bills that are up for in the legislative session. When it comes to public records, we have a few bills. One of them says that public employees have no right to privacy at all in their personnel files. I don't know how far that'll go. Two of them talk about information in personnel files that are private. So now you can have your phone number, your email, and your home address. That'll be redacted if somebody ever asks for the employee's records. We have two bills that are saying only Louisiana citizens can ask for public records. One bill that talks about something called the deliberative process privilege. That's getting a lot of action right now. When it comes to open meetings, we have one bill that's going to change how you notify, like I spoke about before, that they want to change how you notify, maybe make it more digital. So the public body would have to go to the DOA and notify them. And the other one, which I have in bold, is it requires certain public bodies to broadcast live all of its proceedings. And the reason why I have it in bold is because if you're in a parish that has a population of more than 25,000, this law applies, that you have to broadcast live your meetings. And Lafourche Parish, when I checked, has 95,000 people as of the 2020 census. So this law might affect you. So just keep that up. That's, I think, HB what? 303, right? 103, gosh, all right. Yeah, HB 103, keep your eyes out for that, all right? If you have any questions, I'll stay over here to the side. Just talk to me. Thanks for coming. Hope you have a good night. Drive safe.
All right, thank you all so much for being here. I hope these booklets are helpful. I hope you can reference back to them whenever you have questions. If you don't want to ask a question here and you get home and you think about it, give us a call at the office. You can call us at any time, ask the question, we'll try to answer it for you, and if not, we certainly will get in touch with the AG's office so that we can get you the answer to your questions. Thank you again, and thank you for serving on these boards and commissions. You are public servants. You don't have to do it. And so you're making this community a better place, and I thank you for choosing to serve, and thank you for making our community a little bit better. So thank you guys. Have a great night. Safe travels home.